Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for special rank in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show which shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually majors on geopolitics. And today is no exception. Indeed, today, in reality, we're looking at the situation which has affected us all, and that's the death of the Sovereign of the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth II. And obviously, if there's a death, we're going to have, and we have already, a new king, King Charles III. So what I wanted to do actually was work in tandem with a great guest we've got on today, who works with a company called DAPS. Now, what I'm going to let her do actually is explain to you who she is, what she does, how she does it, and then let her, for a strange way of working at it on this particular occasion, come at me with questions relating to the death of the Sovereign of the United Kingdom. So with no further ado, Firgas, can you introduce yourself and tell me what you do?
Sure, 100%. Thanks for having me on, Carlton. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. So my name's Firgas Esack, and I am a publicist, but I'm also the co-founder of DAPS Agency. Now, the DAPS stands for a couple of things. Technically, it stands for Dog and Pony Show, but our little like within the business, it stands for doing actual proper shit. So it's one of the so we're a full service brand agency, just like so many else out there. My co-founder Annalie and I wanted to shake the industry up a little bit, challenge the industry a little bit. So the interesting thing about DAPS is that we're all consummate professionals, as it were. You know, we've all got at least 15 years experience in our respective trades, and when we come together we bring ideas, but we also bring, you know, delivery and you know, because of our understanding of the media, the journalists that we're talking to and the media connections that we've got are all sort of really old friends. So this well, okay, let me rewind and tell you what happened on you know, the day of the sovereign's passing. Okay. So all of us, so as a team, we'd always spoken about creating some news content that was packaged up as broadcast first. You know, so normally when you do a survey, it's a lot of questions and you're throwing caution to the wind about what the results are going to yield. And what we thought was, actually, let's think about this as a broadcast first opportunity. Let's think about the spokespeople that we've got to comment on the late Queen's passing, and how and what those interesting things that they've got to talk about are, and then let's survey the general population and see what the parity is and see what the results are that come out. So fortunately, we work with an amazing agency called Ginger, whose survey arm is called Perspectives Global, and I can't thank them enough because they are so brilliant and they're so agile and they're so quick. So what we did, I mean, honestly, the second that we saw those BBC reporters coming out with their black ties on, we got on a brainstorm. We collectively got on a brainstorm, and you know, I know this might to some people sound a bit like ambulance chasing, but what we wanted to do was to be the first, to just take a genuine nationwide temperature check. Just find out what people are actually thinking. You know, you've got what the BBC's telling you. You've got, you know, what the Mail Online's telling you. You've got, you know, all of that. You've got, you know, you've got Gladys, who met the late Queen in, you know, 1962 at a WI meeting and you know, being rolled out for BBC Breakfast. But what do people actually think, and what do people actually feel, and what do they fear? So we commissioned this survey. We got it out straight away. We got the answers back like in probably record time, in about 18 hours, and there were some really interesting findings. So
like,
I'll read you through a few quick top line headlines, but then, you know, we can drill down into some of them a little bit further. Okay, so over half of Britain thinks that the death of Queen Elizabeth II will bring a new era for the monarchy. Now, that's maybe, you know, to be expected. It's, you know, I guess it's a positive thing. Interestingly, the majority of women in Britain, I mean, very much the majority, think William should have been king, and 53% of the men of Britain think that Charles, you know, rightly should be, but should take the throne, right? So those were like a sort of slightly scandalous headlines, but drilling down, and this is why I want to talk to you, is that we unearthed lots of interesting data about how people feel about the Commonwealth, and obviously there's lots about that in the news today. But just to go back one step, I think my favourite sort of intuitively my favourite stat about this is that 70% of the British public think that the late Queen Elizabeth I was devoted to her country, but only 38% think she was fair and diplomatic.
Okay.
So I'm using that to preface the fact that the survey also said that 17% hope that this will signify the beginning of the end for the royal family, and 10% of Britain think this will be the end of the Commonwealth. Now, when I say 10% of Britain, when you break that down, 25% of Scotland hope that it will signify the end of the Commonwealth, and 20% of Scotland hope that it will signify the end of the royal family.
Right, but let me ask two questions from that. One is, what's the coefficient of the actual sample? So obviously we're as we do with all samples, we are basically saying we've used a focus grouping process in some way, shape or means. You've taken X amount of people, ABs, C1s, whatever, and you put them together, and you're then extrapolating that to say this is what Britain thinks. So the first question is that real? Do we have the right number of individuals? And you know what polling's like. Some polls are pretty much good and some are less. So do we have the right polling? So let's take into account, let's say we do. Let's look at that first instance. Then we're talking about, what do the public understand? So let's take in isolation first the Commonwealth. What do the public understand by the Commonwealth? Now, we've had pretty much wall-to-wall media on this issue of the Queen dying. And within that, we've had a lot, and I mean a hell of a lot, about the Commonwealth. And it's clear to me that most reporters, and definitely the public, are not au fait with what the Commonwealth is. You know, somebody who's having been to 2 or 3 of the Commonwealth heads of government meetings and seen heads of Commonwealth, we hear the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth, and I think that many Britons think that means that we've just changed imperial perspective for a Commonwealth perspective, e.g. that Britain's still ruling and that these people listen to what the Queen says, some way, shape or means, and de facto then the British government. That's not what the Commonwealth is. That's the first thing. So second thing is, the Queen is not the head of state in the vast majority of Commonwealth countries. Indeed, she's only head of state in 14 of them. And when you look at that, where she is the head of state, then you basically got the old dominions, because as you know, under the old imperial system, you had dominions, which were the Commonwealth. Then you had other countries which are territories. Then you had countries which were the Queen's, the monarch's territory, Guernsey, Jersey, etc., not part of the United Kingdom, actually, but run by, the royals with it. But by that, it gives it a de facto United Kingdom. They are part, but they're not part. So they were never part of the European Union, example. So you get that. So there's a real mix match in the United Kingdom as what belongs to where. And that's just something that was actually much clearer under, say, the French Empire, where everywhere was practically a part of France. So that's just what it was, end of story. And so every school kid at 12:35, regardless of whether you're in the South Pacific or in the Caribbean or in mainland France, learned exactly the same thing. So it was all the same, right? Britain was never like that. Britain's empire was never like that. Oftentimes we ran through, the greatest empire the world has ever seen, 3/4 of the world, etc., etc., etc. But often they ran through local leaders and worked in a different perspective. So the Commonwealth, really, there's 14 countries where the Queen is still the head. And you could argue that it's the old Dominion countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, obviously used to be South Africa, but no longer, where the Queen is still head of state of those. Those are by far the biggest numbers. The other countries where the Queen tends to be head of state is in the Caribbean, so countries which have been British and taken over since 1640, 1650, but they're extremely small, some of them. Some of them have a population less than Rochdale. Yeah, give you just taking a place, 250,000 people, 150,000 people, but she's head of state. Don't get me wrong, some of them are very, very lucrative, Turks and Caicos, etc., but they're not big countries. And then you've got some in the Pacific that are still run by the United Kingdom as Queen as head of state. And then obviously there's Jamaica, which is a bit bigger than the others, but Jamaica's still only 2.5 million people. So, even Jamaica as a bigger thing is still at 2.5 million people. So that doesn't mean in any way, shape or means that Commonwealth where the Queen is head of state and where the Queen isn't head of state now, the countries that aren't, so Pakistan, India, countries that are even joining, because some countries are joining that have never been part of the British Empire, Rwanda, Mozambique, other countries have Togo has put itself forward to join, right? So these are countries that join because there's an advantage, they think, particularly in Africa, in joining, because it's another body that they can talk within that doesn't necessarily give them more power, but gives them a unity of purpose. So obviously you've got the Africa Union, and then there's the Commonwealth, which gives you an idea of unity of purpose, and there is an advantage to it. But they are joining as absolutely, totally sovereign countries. Great Britain is not directing it. There's nobody in Britain telling Pakistan what to do with its nuclear weapons. There's nobody in Britain telling India what to do with its economy, which is now bigger than the United Kingdom's economy, right? So this is the thing we need to understand. So when you do that survey, people don't understand that and they think, they'll now all leave us. Well, no, they won't. Some may well say the Queen is no longer head of state, like they did in Barbados, a country with, I think now Barbados population, 350,000 people without the tourist, right? So that's what I'm saying. So some will leave. But it won't be the end of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth will stay because it's advantageous to the countries to be in it. The question was, will the King be the head of it? Now, luckily, before the Queen died, they actually had this question at the last CHOGM, which is Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and he was voted to be the head still. Now, what does the head mean? It's titular. Because believe me, when you go to the meetings, right, and as I told you, I've been to them, they argue like cats in a bag, right? Okay. As you can imagine, that's what they're arguing like. So, and then they come out with some sort of protocol at the end of the day, which is advantageous to all of them. So that's what I'd say about the Commonwealth.
So, okay, let's just rewind, because you've obviously got loads of experience about this and loads of intel. So obviously today we've got, there's talk of Antigua and Bermuda and
very small countries.
Quite a few others, talking about leaving. Way back when,
not leaving the Commonwealth. No, removing the sovereign of the United Kingdom as head of their country. So effectively the king or queen. Not leaving the Commonwealth. No.
Readdressing their allegiance to the sovereign of the United Kingdom, I guess.
That's it. That's
it's a better way to phrase this, isn't it? It's a better way to
not leaving the Commonwealth. They stay within the Commonwealth. Because most of the countries in the Commonwealth, there's 56 countries, and the vast majority of them are sovereign nations where the Queen is not their head. They have a president who heads them up. Or some, Eswatini as it's now called, used to be the old Swaziland, always had their own king as head of state.
Sure. So essentially, there's talk in the papers today about these territories seeking their own independence.
Yes. No, they're already independent. Sorry, they're already independent. But some of them, they're already independent, but the Queen has been retained by them. It's like Canada, Australia, New Zealand are totally independent, as you know. They are independent countries. But the Queen was, and now the King, is still the head of state. But they are totally independent from the United Kingdom. That's all the others are talking about doing. Being totally independent, but just changing the Queen, and they'll have their own president, like Barbados has. Barbados is still part of the Commonwealth. It just now has a president, and not the Queen, or in this term, then the King. That's the misunderstanding, I think, from Britons.
So from your perspective, way back when, I mean, we obviously have this sort of narrative that plays out about Queen Elizabeth II discovering that she was Queen whilst she was on the
Kenya
tour. And then obviously in more recent days, William and Kate have been on their tour of the Caribbean, and it's been hugely criticised, and there's obviously been lots of revolt, and there was some I remember that picture of them.
Imperial overtones.
Imperial overtones. Yes. You put words into my mouth, but exactly. But I mean, I just remember that picture of them shaking hands with the children in Trenchtown through the fence, through the grills of the fence, and you just think, gosh, if anything sums up that imperialism, So, but back when Queen Elizabeth would have been there doing that, what would have been the biggest threat?
Right. Okay. So. You spoke about right in the beginning when she was a princess and she was in Kenya. Right then, Kenya was a colony of the United Kingdom. So the biggest threat to Queen Elizabeth at that time, when Britain did run the country, effectively from the Foreign Office, because it was a colony, were people seeking their independence. So you've all heard of the Mau Mau insurgency, etc. And in Malaysia, the Malayan insurgency, etc., etc., etc. Right. Okay. These were countries seeking their own independence. Right. They are now independent. None of them, by the way, has the Queen as head of state of those two I've just mentioned. And if you look at Jamaica, it is independent from the United Kingdom. It chose to retain the Queen at the time as head of state. So you ask yourself why. You've now made yourself independent. You've got yourself free from British imperial rule. Why keep the Queen? The reason, I think, was stability. Because if you bring about political parties sometimes, especially in countries that have been ex-colonies, and the model is winner take all, but it's a colonial country, sometimes having a president straight away after that means to people that there isn't a fair crack at the whip. So what they did is they retained the Queen. So there is this sort of monarchical power that sits there that is immovable, so the top head of state there is the Queen. And so people always knew that if there was a problem with the political forces, there was always a top level to return to. Generally, it was a local person that acted as what they called the Queen's lieutenant, who acted as that they could ask for assistance. So even in Jamaica, the top court is Britain's court. So it retained that aspect because they didn't want it to be perceived as looking at one party or another. Because, Jamaica went through this whole period with Manley and Siaga and this whole instability in the United States trying to destabilize it and Cuba trying to destabilize it. So that's why it was advantageous, they thought, to keep the Queen as head. That probably has now gone. So that's why there was a stability aspect. Now, when they had this latest visit, yes, you're right, the optics weren't right in many ways. You asked me about dangers to them. I would say the dangers to royals in Jamaica, other than, and I'll say it again, I think I spoke to you some time ago about fixated individuals, are always going to be a danger for royals. You kill a royal of the British royal family and you'll be known forever. Okay, so that's your challenge. But there's the other guy who doesn't really kill the royal because he wants to be famous forever. He kills the royal for whatever reason in his or her mind, gal or girl, man or woman, for whatever reason in their mind. It might be killing the royal gives them some sort of power. It might be killing the royal allows the royal to live forever. You just don't know with fixated people. I mean, I've seen all different types of fixated people who have all, massive ideas as to why they're doing something. So you can never say what that idea will be, but that is the greatest threat to a royal, I believe. Add now to that an Islamic religious perspective. Now, I'm using Islam as an example. It could be another type of religious perspective somewhere else. I don't know, Catholicism, say, against the Church of England in some place. Yeah. So you can never rule anything out. But
that's a fair point, isn't it? Because the Queen is so intertwined with the Church of England, you could almost pick any other religion, and it's
correct.
There's a potential threat there, isn't there?
Correct. Because the Queen is the Church of England.
Yeah.
Literally, or the King now. So you're absolutely right. So that's a potential. But how far up the gradient is it? When you're doing potentials, you've got to look realistically about, where are we going to place most of our threat analysis? And I would say it's pretty much down, but fixated is high for them. That's what I'd say.
So then fast forward to what about when Charles was in Rwanda and he said, he sort of quasi-apologised, didn't he? He kind of said, yes. I'm so terribly sorry for all the slavery, but I'm not really. It was very whitewashed, wasn't it? I feel like it was a heartfelt apology, but it wasn't actually accepting responsibility.
Right. This is the tightrope. The deal the royals appear to have done, and a constitutional guy will say it better than I, but when one of the great individuals lost his head, the deal that they seem to have done was give us the trappings of the royalty, yeah, and we'll stay out of politics. That's basically what the deal was. Okay, when Cromwell's gone, the end of the Great Protector, they wanted somebody else in, but they didn't want a king that's going to spend all the money and fight endless wars as he has been. So stay out of politics, mate, and you can get your crown back. Yeah, you own half of Britain anyway, so, sign half it back to us in a certain manner. We'll give you a amount of money. So they've done some deal. So when you start apologising for slavery, you're clearly stepping with both feet into politics. So it's very difficult for him. So I absolutely think the guy was saying heartfelt, but I think he was very careful not to try and feel the measure of the government of the day. Because I'll tell you now, from my perspective, I don't see Boris Johnson, who was then Prime Minister, making any apology at all. So that's a problem, isn't it? So I think he wanted to say something, but without saying it.
So given the cultural mix of the population of Great Britain right now, what do you think that what do you think that Britain's feeling about the relationship between the royals and the Commonwealth?
As I said before, I think there's a massive misunderstanding. So we cleared the misunderstanding up. I think some Britons will think, what's it got to do with us? Right? Because Imperial Britain's quite easy. Right? Basically, what Imperial Britain is a monopoly. Okay, you go to Jamaica. Why is Jamaica important? Because it produces sugar and it produces bauxite, and everything it produces, you take, okay, as the imperial motherland, and you ship it back to the imperial motherland. You go to India and you take the salt, you take the textiles, you take the whatever it might be, and you ship it back to Britain, or you destroy that industry in that country. I'll give you a good example of it. Egypt, when Britain took over the Anglo-Sudan Egyptian perspective, it destroyed Egyptian cotton and put that cotton in northwest of England, right? And then sold it back to those people because it's a monopoly. Okay, so you produce crap cars and you can sell them to India all day long because they have to buy their car. British cars, because it is a monopoly. That's the way it works. Now, that works very, very well for the mother country, Britain, the United Kingdom. Doesn't work as well for the colony, right? And if you look at the imperial system of Britain, most of the roads that were made and built and put together, and you can look at it on a map, they all were basically from where the raw materials were to the coast, right? In order so the stuff can get out. Now, where Britain settled, then there was a bigger infrastructure. So Kenya example, the bigger infrastructure because people were settling there. South Africa, they were settling there. Australia, New Zealand, settling there. Where they weren't settling, much less infrastructure. Just let's get the goods out and move it on. And then finish the finished goods back to those countries. So no extension of that process. And that's just not Britain doing that. That's basically all of the powers that be were doing that. So this is why it's for the average Briton who doesn't understand that, he says, well, what are we getting out of the Commonwealth? Still presuming it's run by Britain in some way, shape or means, and that somehow monies are going into the Commonwealth and nothing's coming back out. Right. Big misunderstanding. Okay, because if you look at the number one donations from the number one countries, you will often find that the people who receive the most donations in terms of aid are generally countries that you want to buy influence in or you want to keep propped up. So if we go back, just take the United States as an example, because it's a very good one. The state of Israel got more money from the United States than anybody else, right? Because it needed a buffer in the Middle East, and they pumped literally every year tens of billions, in fact hundreds of billions into the state of Israel. Second was the state of Egypt, because, of course, the state of Egypt was doing what it wanted. And again, it was a buffer for the countries around it. So that's how aid has been spent. And most recently, it's been massive amounts of aid in military hardware to Afghanistan. But if you look at the lives of the Afghans, indeed, you could argue the support given against the Soviets to the Taliban, back in the 80s, took a country from women walking about in miniskirts in downtown Kabul at the universities. It's in the 70s, you know that, under the king. Do whatever blokes were doing, and we supported a people against that, Pashtun individuals, Taliban. In fact, we orientated them towards it to say, actually, this is not what women should be doing, right? Now, why? Because it was advantage to us in the geopolitics of the Cold War. So what I'm saying is it just depends on what you're going to do. Now, the reason why I bring all that up is because the vast majority of the public don't understand any of that. They just think we're giving something to people who are then killing us or whatever the circumstance might be. They don't understand the background to the issues. So your survey will show the perspective of the vast majority of people who don't understand why things are being done and misconceive how things are being done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed. I mean, I think for what's interesting from our side is that actually, what you're looking at is 10% of Brits thinking that that the relationship with the Commonwealth should cease, and then a much larger percentage in Scotland, like a quarter, 25% in Scotland, right?
Can I address the Scots?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that in a minute. But all I would say is, from your side, having dealt with, I mean, you mentioned risk assessment, and you mentioned, when you go into other territories and all the rest of it. But actually, 10%, if it's a 10% population risk, that's actually even though it's 10%, that's actually quite high risk, isn't it?
That's an interesting one. Very interesting one. The vast majority of people, I believe, I may be wrong, I say there's a talented 10 of people. Okay, and I think what I've done in my past has borne out this time and time and time again. You should understand that when I was in the special branch, looking at Libya, example, I'll just be concrete on Libya. I also looked at China, I looked at other countries. When I say look at, I'm monitoring them, right, from their perspective. Right, so I'm looking at Libya and Colonel Gaddafi. By the way, Libya's population, very, very small. When Colonel Gaddafi took over, 2 million, 2.5 million. You'd think there were hundreds of millions. It's 2.5 million people. Right, chicken feed. Okay, now, so you're looking at Libya, and what did Libya do? It was pumping massive amounts of oil. 70% of that oil, let me get it right, was it about 78% of that oil went straight to the oil company? The Libyan state, in the form of King Idris, took the rest. And he handed the money out as he felt fit to keep people on board. Right, so Gaddafi takes over and he says, sorry, that oil deal, BP, that oil deal, Standard Oil, don't stand anymore. We now want it 60-40. I think that was his original thing, and then it was 70-30. So in other words, instead of them getting 78%, now he's saying, we want 70% and we'll give you 30%. Now, if you're an oil baron, that ain't good. So you're now an enemy, right? In addition to that, not only does he do it with the industrialists, he actually says that there's a big US Air Force base there, which was joined with the UK to some extent. He says that's closed down, right? It's his Cold War, yeah? That's closed down, right? So what you then get is, this fella's an enemy. He must be a communist, right? Because the next thing he's going to do is be with the Russians. Now, he's never said he was a communist, never was so orientated. In fact, he had the thing called the Third Universal Way, not communism, not capitalism, not Islam. So, again, he's also angered the Islamic people who were running the game, right? Because they say, now we've lost our power because this guy isn't saying Islam, right? We got a big problem. So he makes a whole load of enemies. Basically, within about 3 or 4 months, a plan is put together to topple him. The plan is unsuccessful. Gaddafi stays. But Gaddafi, being the guy he was, doesn't say, they've tried a plan to sort me out, I'll keep my head down. No, what he says is, right, I'm going to support everybody who hates him. With money I get, everybody who hates him, I'm going to support them. Right? So he then starts supporting with tons of money, supporting people, IRA, whomever else. Right? Okay. So now you've got a legitimate beef with him because he's supporting the IRA and giving them tons of weapons, literally tons of weapons. Right, to fight the British state. So yeah, we tried to topple him with our partners in the Central Intelligence Agency, but now that hasn't happened. But now you've got a real reason because he's supporting. Yeah, and then he's also supporting a lot of safe American organisations that are trying to get rid of the US hegemony in the Southern Hemisphere. So then, of course, the Yanks, he's a bad guy. Bam, 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 bam. So now you've got legitimacy. So what I'm saying to you is that's how things happen. And we monitor those things.
I'm just going to jump a bit, just because you made me think of this, right? One thing that I know this isn't real life, this is just popular culture, but one thing that I always think about is when you think about Libya is in Back to the Future. I thought it was really bold that they framed the guys that gave the doctor, that whatever he's called, Dr. Emmett Brown. You know, when he got the plutonium to make the car go Back to the Future, that they actually positioned them as Libyans. I thought that was
interesting
move, because obviously that film's got so much that film's timeless, isn't it? But it's
put my hands up. Never seen the movie.
You've never seen it?
No, never seen it. That's what I'm saying. I put my hands up high. Never seen the movie. Never seen it.
That's your night sorted, and we can pick up on this afterwards. But otherwise, carry on the point that you.
So the reason why I bring that up is just to give you an idea, concrete idea of how a nation becomes a problem for us and how we then have an assessment and how the assessment isn't incorrect, but we miss out the first bit as to probably why it wants to do something against us. Now, most people aren't as bold as Gaddafi was for whatever reason. Maybe they're sensible. So it's not as stark, it's not as open. But he was stark because he had beliefs, I guess. Look, nobody can say to me, having studied Gaddafi and looked at him from in the branch, then outside of the branch in Secret Intelligence Service, then beyond, nobody can say to me that the guy was just taking money for himself and stealing. Listen, this guy lived 9 times out of 10, frankly, in the desert as a nomad type fella. Now, did his family steal money? Take money from the state? Of course he did. Of course he did. That's what happens in states. That's what. So they were, looked after themselves. But I wouldn't say this guy was looking after himself, to be fair. So when you're looking at threat, you're looking at all these aspects, all these issues. What are the dangers? And you're also looking at the mindset of the people who we are safeguarding. So let me give you an example of this. We say North Korea is a maniacal state because it wants to create nuclear weapons. We say the same about the state of Iran, okay? And there's several others in the past. Obviously, we said it about Libya because they want nuclear weapons. We said it about Saddam because he was talking about nuclear weapons. But yet still, we have our very most recent competition to see, and I'm going to state as a competition because that's basically what it was, but you'll know what I mean, to say who was going to be the Prime Minister. Now, the level of facts coming out of that as to how we chose, or has a section of our party chose who was going to be the Prime Minister, were very, very limited. But I'll never forget the one bit where it said, would you be willing to press the nuclear button? Yes, I would be. And everybody says, oh, she's a strong woman, Liz Truss, right? What would we say if that statement was made by Ayatollah?
Agreed. I think you make a very, very valid point. Huh? Just as a slight sidebar, we've got a client called Mark Delisse. He's a choral arranger and celebrity vocal coach. I mean, to be honest, anything that's on telly that's got singing in it, to be honest, he's probably behind it. But he arranged and conducted the Kingdom Choir at Harry and Meghan's wedding, and he also sang at the Queen's speech last year. Like his community choir sang "O Little Town of Bethlehem" at the Queen's speech, and he is very, very vocal at the moment about how Rule Britannia should be abolished, and that Charles should do that.
Interesting. Yeah. You come up with some good questions. Very interesting. It's a historical perspective, isn't it? I mean, there's never will be slaves, blah, 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 blah. Right, okay.
What I'm going with this is, do you think
I know exactly where you're going.
It brings about a level of rousing nationalism that doesn't need to exist right now, and actually does more harm than good?
I know exactly where you're going. And it's an interesting one. And it's a historically interesting one. There's 2 elements to it. Britons never will be slaves. So obviously you think black folk, will they like that because Britons will never be slaves? Well, first thing is, black people were in Britain from at least 2,000 and odd years ago, when the Romans came, when a black Roman emperor, Emperor Septimus Severus, brought with him his Legianus Africanus, and that's exactly the name that it was, and he was on Hadrian's Wall and pushed back the Spicks. So they were clearly Britons because they had children with the local women. So would that be negative that you said that statement? So there's a question there that we can look at. So there is a question there that we can look at, that if we assume that Britons look in a certain manner, then maybe we find that problematic. But if you understand that Britons can look like anybody, then maybe that bit isn't problematic. My personal view would be, I'm not really that much bothered about Rule Britannia, because I guess that's what you sing. My biggest problem would be, a bigger problem would be God Save the King or Queen, not because I'm not saying God Save the King or the Queen, but because I think in a modern state, surely we should be talking about the nation rather than one individual within the nation. That would be my perspective. If we had, example, I vow to thee my country, blah, blah, da, 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 great song, yeah, I would think that talks about the nation. Do you see what I'm saying? Rather than just one individual within the nation. I don't
Agreed. And we could sidebar to. I mean, do you know what, cousin? I'm not even going to say we could sidebar to have a little chat about the final chapter in your book, because people can just go and buy your book, and then they can understand the narrative about how people in Britain identify.
Yes. Yeah,
there you go. There's
absolutely.
plug for your book. Right, should we talk about Scotland then? Because obviously the
Scotland. Poor accent.
Weaving its way through the streets of Edinburgh as we speak.
Yeah. If I'm a Scottish nationalist, right? If I'm a Scottish nationalist and I want Scotland to be no longer part of the United Kingdom, I think now we must have a vote. Two things happened in 2014 to my perspective of looking at the Scots. And I hasten to add, I did not look at them officially, so do not say the special branch was looking at Scottish people and being negative. But clearly what the special branch was looking at was at Scottish people who might, same with Irish people or English people, who might cause trouble and strife, right, in the United Kingdom. And I think a state has a right to do that. Do you not? Because we talked before about the numbers of 10%, and what I was wanting to say was that actually of the talented 10, it only takes 2% to start people going mad. It doesn't take 10%. Because you see, what happens is, if you do things in the right manner, you can actually orientate a lot of people to action, and you don't need to do it yourself. You can make other people do it. So now, if I'm a Scot
survey, it's 20% in Scotland. It's 20%.
Yeah, exactly.
We want to hope this will signify the end of the monarchy. So,
exactly. It's powerful. It's powerful. It's powerful. And this is what I'm saying. If I'm a Scots, now is my time, because the two things in 2014 which scuppered Scots' independence were no longer part of the European Union, okay, because they thought that they wouldn't get back in, and absolutely they wouldn't have. Because what would have happened is, a la what happens in Spain with the region of Barcelona, is that the Spanish government will say, well, listen, if you allow independence, okay, to that region, what will happen is throughout the European Union, every country that has that type of anomaly of one region being very, very powerful will start breaking away as long as it can stay within the European Union. And I think they're probably about right. So you could see Bavaria saying, listen, you're going to leave the rest of Germany, we'll just be our Bavaria. There's always politicians willing to do that sort of nonsense, which you saw in Yugoslavia. So you could see that. So therefore, what happened is that if Scotland would have moved away from the United Kingdom, it would have found it difficult to get back into the European Union. But what's now changed? What's changed is we've left the European Union. Of course, the European Union would now take Scotland open-handed. We'll take you back next week. In fact, you can have the United Kingdom's place because you didn't want to leave. You voted, and if I'm Nicola Sturgeon, I go to them and I say, listen, we voted not to leave. So why would you now be dogmatic?
And the trade routes are so much simpler anyway.
Exactly. So you automatically get that place. So I think they'd be in, within a year, if not much
funny,
less.
Isn't it? It is interesting because Alex Salmond said he would keep the monarchy, didn't he? He said, and then Nicola Sturgeon didn't.
Yep.
But she didn't say no. She didn't say no. She wouldn't. She just didn't confirm or deny. So which way do you think she's going to go?
Brilliant, Fergus. Because now you come to the second part of the 2014. The second bit that scuppered them was the Queen. Because a lot of people in Scotland, they think of or thought of the Queen as very special to them. Balmoral, etc., Queen walking about like a normal person, going in the village, blah, 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 blah. All good. And they love the idea of the Queen, right? This is why I'd say you jump very quickly if you're a Scottish nationalist. You don't want Charlie to get to that level. So you jump before he gets to that level of we like him. You've already said to me that half of the women turn around and say he shouldn't be king. We want that bonny young fella who's going to be the king, yeah? Because he's already got that kudos. So they're saying we want the young guy. Now, you can't jump because that causes a massive constitutional problem. But the point is you can see the popularity of the young fella. So you don't want to wait until that young fella gets in. You want to now hit it right now while it's still raw, while they're not sure whether they like this guy or not. And so let's jump now for our Scottish independence. Now, do we keep him as king? Of course we do. Why wouldn't we? Aussies have kept him as king. New Zealanders have kept him as king. They're free and independent. And after all, After all, he's the King of Scotland. You see, we always forget this. We in England are we're a bit arrogant, really. I spent not 60, that'd be wrong. I want to be precise. About 50 years of my life, I ever only remember us talking about England. I used to live in Germany. They say England. And they mean the whole of the United Kingdom, but they say England. Right? That's what they were saying, England. It's relatively recent we now say the United Kingdom. But everybody used to say, oh, do we say Englander? You're from England. Nobody's talking about a Scotsman. Right? So he is, however, the King of Scotland because they were never conquered. You know, all that way back when you had Septimus Severus fighting him, they were never conquered. There was an act of union that brought them both together. And that act of union made the Queen of Scotland and the Queen of England. So they've got absolute rights to that royal family. Absolute rights. And they can sell that better with the Queen, with the King, because the Queen's will was, I want the United Kingdom to stay together. That was the Queen's will. That's a difficult one to go against. But this fella, what's his position? Do we really know? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
They can play on that.
It's interesting, Carlton, because I know you always. I know we always have banter about the fact that I went to Gordonston, and
absolutely.
I remember Charles went there for about 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
And he hated it, and then just ran off to Eton, didn't he? But if you look at the front cover of the Herald, the day after the Queen died, the front cover of the Scottish Herald, it was this amazing picture of her stood on the glen in the pouring rain with like the grey skies in the back. It summed up but like you said, to your previous point, it summed up her passion for Scotland and how much she loved being there. And and at the end of the day, she chose to end her life there. Correct. So there is that. But I think you're completely right. They don't feel that love and they don't feel that connection with Charles because he's never given it back to the country in any way, shape or form. Maybe it's a challenge. Maybe it's an opportunity. I mean, obviously he does talk about the ecology and sustainability and a greener world and all of that, and maybe there is maybe there is some way that he'll sort of win their hearts, but I agree with you. I think it's a very close call because actually what they're sitting on is quite lucrative.
Absolutely. And they are working on it right now. Look, let's not misunderstand this. From the day, and I like the fella, don't get me wrong, I don't dislike him. From the day the new king has been put in, they will be working on, the powers that be, making him acceptable very quickly because they can see that deficit. He had to work on Wales, didn't he? And he did his work on Wales. Yeah, the work was done. Prince of Wales, blah, 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 blah. His work was done. He hasn't worked on Scotland, and I guess that's because that was the system. But the system's had its own handicap against him now. So now he's got to work on Scotland. So if I'm a Scottish nationalist, I see that and I say, best we get in before that work actually. Look, Scotland hemorrhages people. You know that. It hemorrhages people left, right, and centre. They leave. Right? What is it? 5 million of them, 6 million? It hemorrhages people. The Scots all over the world. In fact, I think in my heritage, the Scots. Right? So they're all over the world, Scots. Right? Now, there's an absolute romanticism of Scottish nationality. That's the point I'm making. So from outside in, there's this nationality of Scotland. And I think now, without the two other aspects, the Queen and the Union, I think they can win.
Sure. So okay. I remember you've always talked to me in the context of Brexit that people should have thought about. People should have done a risk assessment on it. People should have thought about what the future might look like if Brexit happened, rather than just ticking yes or no on their ballot box. So what factors should we be considering if Scotland takes nationalism?
Yeah. It's actually more difficult than Brexit, to be fair. Because with Brexit, I could see all the advantages of staying in the European Union. I actually couldn't see an advantage of leaving. I've got to be absolutely truthful. I couldn't see one. At the end of the day, they're all sovereign states and still are. At the end of the day, Britain played a massive part within that, really. At the end of the day, the whole of Britain's ideology was based around what I call the bridge. Okay, so I'll explain that. And this is Ted Heath. Got to give it to Ted. He could be many things, and we all have heard of many things. But what I will give to Ted is this. He realised that the United Kingdom, when he was working with Eden, and that the United Kingdom couldn't pull off the Suez attack with the Israelis and the French, he realised the UK was no longer what it was. He should have known it before, because frankly, without the Soviets dying and the US putting their money in, we wouldn't have won the Second World War, right? The money. So he realised that. So where do we go? So he wanted in the Union, as you know, EEC as it was, the European Economic Community. Scuppered in the beginning by the French, because the French quite rightly feared, that this will become an Anglophile thing, because the language that was to be is English, right? Because of Britons and because of the people who use it, but really because of the United States, right? So that was the language to be. So up to then, if you remember, in the European Union, or EEC as it was, French was a big language, wasn't it? And he knew that it would be lost, so he didn't want them in. So de Gaulle was able to keep Britain out. But then we come in. And frankly, let's be truthful about it. English was the language everybody used. We were big friends with people we brought in after the year 2000, because all of them had seen Britain as a great country to be with. Britain, in many ways, is forward-thinking. So this bridge was the United States, most powerful country in the world by far, European Union, you know, countries all coming together, which in the end are a bloc which gives the United States some fear, because they can block together. Okay, and if you look at GDP, you'd see that the GDP of the European Union is about 16 trillion. The GDP of the United States was like 18 to 19 trillion, right? Each country in the European Union, though, if you just put them as a country, right, this is Trump. If you put them as a country, Germany was something like 4.1, Britain was something like 2.8, France was something like 2.7, 2.8, then comes down to Italy about 2.5. So nothing's coming anywhere near the United States, but together they're powerful. And obviously you've then got China, which is 13 trillion by itself and jumping all the time. So to keep the United States as number one, yeah, Trump wanted to split. But if you look at Obama before him, he was happy with the European Union because Britain was its Trojan horse. So what you had was Britain doing the United States bidding in the European Union, yeah, the European Union knowing this, but knew that if we want something done with the US, we can work it through the Britons. So that way we had immense power, yeah, between this bloc that we had. Once we step out of that, what do the Yanks do? Well, we're no longer any good to them, right? Because we're not in the European Union. We're not connected with anybody else, right? So they look to then the French, the Germans, somebody who can play that middle role for them, right? We lose power. What's our policy? What are we all about? The Foreign Office for years had played this middle ground. What are we about now? What do? We're scuppering around looking for something. So even if you take away all of the economy, politically, it demeans us. And every former prime minister knew this. And every one of them said it. They didn't articulate that because they can't, because it makes Britain look as though it's not as powerful as what it is. But they know what they're playing with. So you scratch one. Tell me one of the former prime ministers that said we should leave. There isn't one. Yeah, because they're sitting at the top table. There wasn't one. You know, but give the people their due who worked the campaign. They were smart enough, and it's mainly that guy Cummings. They were smart enough to go. You know what Cummings did? Cummings went into the pub and he said, "What don't you like?" He'll tell you this. He'll tell you this. What don't you like? Oh, England don't look like England used to do. Not the word England. Not Scotland, not Northern Ireland, not Wales. England doesn't look like England used to. It's an imperfect union, ours, because England is 3/4 of its population, if not more. So it's an imperfect union. And the danger is now that Northern Ireland feels as though it's orientated by the British. Scotland thinks it's orientated by the British. Now, the Welsh are a little bit different, right? Some in the north think they are. When I say the British, they actually mean English. Some in the north think they are, but in the south, they can go either way. So the point is that the English now are in power using the word British. Okay, so they're doing that. So what our problem now is England running the game. What about the other nations? Right? Scots see that. They feel it. Bang. England's running this game. What's our number? What do we do? Best we sit with the European Union.
I think it's interesting, given the amount of highlands and islands around Scotland. You know, I mean, obviously the backstop debate held back the Brexit negotiation for a very long time, and also the conversations about fishing, and obviously, you know, I think like fishing's probably Scotland's biggest export, isn't it? But what's quite interesting is, like, you know, there's so many of those islands that are just owned by really random people. And I think Uri Geller owns an island, doesn't he? And you know, it like where would they actually define the boundary line? And surely it's rife for smuggling.
I think the boundary lines are pretty much clear. We know what's Scotland and what isn't Scotland, as we know. To patrol what you mean.
Trying to patrol like all those tiny little islands.
Well, you've got the same sort of problems in various Scandinavian countries and in Greece in particular. You can say Greece is a massive example of that. But of course, you what Scotland would do, I would suggest to you, is straight away join. It would be part of the European Union, and unlike with the UK, which was in and half out, because we had a lot of opt-outs, didn't we? We wouldn't use forex to control borders, so Scotland wouldn't need to do it by itself. It would use part of the European Union system. So that's what I'm saying. It's got things. And by the way, Scottish oil, right, now becomes lucrative again. Okay, up until now, it's not that there wasn't any oil off the shores of Scotland. It's that it just wasn't economically viable. Now everything's economically viable in terms of energy. Right? So Scotland's now got another bass full of energy sitting in the bloody North Sea. It's got tidal stuff. It's got all this. Energy-wise, could play the game very, very well for its small population.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, like in terms of the trade routes of where they could get that oil,
they've got it in their own sea. Because it would now be Scottish Sea, wouldn't it?
It would now be the Scottish Sea. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's good for thought. So you obviously think they should do it.
No, I don't think they should do it. That's not what I'm saying. Look, in 2014, I was totally and utterly for the United Kingdom. But I think the United Kingdom, and I'm going to say this, and I'll be disliked, has had charlatans in power. I'm being controversial, has had absolute charlatans in power that wanted to do nothing for the country. That guy we just left, and I don't know if the person who's taken over is any better now because the Tory party's gone all that way over. Basically, we're not thinking of the country. You know, I remember Cameron standing there, who wanted to stay in the European Union, stood in front of a whole load of minis with Union Jacks all over them and said, you know, the British car industry. Well, name me a British car. There isn't one. There isn't a mass-produced, but that Mini that they were showing is bloody BMW. Rolls-Royce is BMW. They call them British marques. They're not British companies. They sit in bloody Brussels or they sit in Germany, in Bavaria, and they decide what cars we buy. And if we don't want to buy them, well, what are we going to go? Buy a United States car forward? You know, we don't produce a mass-produced vehicle. We don't have a single one. So what I'm saying is we were fooling people, showing us an image. And I'll tell you an actual real story now, and it's not a state secret. I was running the office that provides protection. And one of my duties was, as a guy, actually run the day-to-day control of the office. I ran everything, the individuals, the firearms, the vehicles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we needed new vehicles, and we used to run Jaguar. right? And I said, well, let's get the best vehicles on the ground now for cars are arguably BMW, for armoured vehicles, for armoured governmental people, BMW, because they're homologated, which means they're built from the ground up, armoured. They've got a factory, costs them billions, and they just build armoured vehicles for heads of state all over the world, right? So they're homologated. Only two other companies do that, Merck and Toyota. And I didn't mention the Japanese companies, which came into Britain because they could fight into the European Union, right? That's why they were here. So I said, let's get these cars. So I'm sitting down with a Foreign Office head honchos, and they said, no way can we run BMWs as a car that drives the Prime Minister around. Look at the optics. What would it look like using German cars? We've got to use British cars. And I said, what British cars are those you talking about? He said, well, Jaguar, Range Rover. I said, Range Rover is run by Tata. It's an Indian company, as is, by the way, Jaguar. They're not British. Well, the public think they are. And that's the problem we've got. The public think they are. And that's Brexit. The public thinks this. The reality is that, and we won't tell them. So it's damaged us, literally damaged us.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that about so many British brands. It is interesting. So just moving back to if Scotland did claim independence, so they'd obviously have their own police force.
Yeah, which they do already, Police Scotland.
And their own army.
Yeah, they'd have to do. Yeah, look, Scots have always fought in the British Army, so there's loads of them. Anyway, Navy. Well, it's like it's what would the agreement be? Actually, a good example would be the Soviet Union breakup, wouldn't it? And the Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc., etc., etc. What was the agreement when they broke up? Who got what? So would it have to be some agreement for the Navy? They'd have to say, your exchequer paid towards this much of the Navy. There'd be big discussions on it, maybe even arguments. But how much would a Navy would it need? How much of an army would it need? It's already got. In Britain, we have 42 different police, in England and Wales, 42 different police forces, right? Scotland used to have 11. They're already under, when they got put all their forces together in one, it's now called Police Scotland. So they're already set up, Police Scotland. And now they try and run more and more stuff themselves. I remember, as I said, when I was running the protection, they started saying, well, actually, we don't need you up in Scotland, because the Met runs all protection, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
In the United Kingdom and throughout the world, right? For British heads of state, heads of government, be it royalty or be it our government, we run it. So it ended up where they were starting to say, well, when he comes into our area, we will do the lead protection. No, you won't. That's still the job of, the Metropolitan Police Special Branch on our SO1 Specialist Protection or royalty. We'll do that. And as you always did do, you will assist. Right. But they do have different laws and always have had. They never change their laws around. They have a procurator fiscal, as you know, because you were up there. Right.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, there's that old adage about getting married in Gretna Green and stuff like that.
Correct, because they've got their own laws. Absolutely. They do. We brought in CPS in 1984, 1985. And funnily enough, I've just done a podcast with the head of the Northwest. You'll know him very, very well, Nazir. I've just got him on a podcast. He's sitting in my can waiting to be put out. He's quite interesting. They've had their procurator fiscal forever. They run police jobs, basically like in Europe. The police in England and Wales are sovereign. Yeah, they basically made all the decisions in the past. Not now because you've got the CPS, but the CPS is halfway there. The Scots have always had that guy, procurator fiscal, who tells them how to run their operations.
Mm.
So,
no, I mean,
different.
It's moved from, the Scotland conversation, I feel like, since last Friday has moved from something that was ideological to something that's actually very real, right?
I think so. And I don't know if what they're saying, Boris's line, and I guess it's still this. Well, I don't guess, I know it's exactly the same line with the present Prime Minister. She's saying we won't give them the independence vote. Well, we sit on democracy a lot. It's pretty difficult to tell people we're not going to give you a vote for your democratic right, isn't it? Especially as it's a union. Yeah, we can't forget it's a union. It's not a conquering, it's a union. So if you're in a union, you can decide whether you want to stay or whether you want to leave, which is what we did in the European Union. It's a union. And it's a union of the United Kingdom. And the bigger danger for me is, right, the even bigger danger is that, and this is what the loyalist, I'll use that terminology, saw in Northern Ireland. The bigger danger is, because we had to do a deal with the European Union, the bigger danger was that Northern Ireland basically effectively stays within the European Union, which is what it is. And what's happened is that the most loyalist of people, the most monarchical, that would be the right word, of people in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish Protestants, basically they see themselves within a very short period of time of being part of the Union of the South and the North.
Well, I mean, we've said this before, Carlton. Isn't it interesting that the press latched onto that image of the Queen shaking hands with Martin McGuinness?
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one, because what else was she going to do?
Yeah, but I mean,
at the end of the day, wars end, don't they? Wars end politically. Wars end politically, don't they? At the end of the day, you can ask for, as we did in the Second World War, unconditional surrender. But do you then keep those people forever and a day as the enemy? No, you don't. Actually, in the end, you shake hands with them and you say, let's get a political agreement, which, by the way, will happen in the Ukraine. I'll tell you that now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I just mean that, I
know it's difficult, but you got to do it, haven't you?
The reportage of the Queen's passing, it was quite interesting that they chose that picture to push to the forefront, because obviously, the Queen's shaken hands and connected with, probably 3/4 of the
exactly.
heads of state in the globe, but they obviously were making that point because they wanted to connect with Northern Ireland, right? Didn't they? They wanted to, even though the IRA, blew up her uncle.
Yeah,
uncle's boat.
I mean, what is the Queen meant to do? Because the other side of that coin is, if the Queen hadn't done that, you think of all the people. I mean, we always talk about, and this is another problem I think we've got, we always talk about the British Army, don't we, in the north of Ireland? And we say, soldiers got killed, and you'll find people like Tugendhat stands up and he says, the British military were doing this. They never talk about the police. Right? So actually, the people who fought most of that war were the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. The police officers on that street, day in, day out, who were the target, who were being blown up, shot in the back of the head, etc., yeah, those guys had to sue for peace in the end. Those guys had to shake hands with the fellow who were killing them. You see what I'm saying? Who's killed their families, whatever. Those guys had to, because they know the opposite is you just keep fighting the war. And frankly, the British Army toured there for 6 months. They had a 6 months tour into the army units, 6 months in, out. They were touring. These guys lived there. For 22 years, these guys were looking under their cars. Is there a bomb there? Every morning.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? But nobody talks about them because, they're just police or whatever. I don't know how they think about it, but they never get spoken about the ISIC, which is now the police service of Northern Ireland, of course. So what I'm saying is that the reality is you've got to shake hands with the enemy because you want peace somewhere along the line.
Somewhere along the lines, right? Okay. So look, I'm going to wrap this up because you've got a big editing job now because we've gone on for ages, and I could talk to you about this for days, but I'm going to summarise this with a question for you, which is that there's a quote that I'm going to misquote probably, I'm sure, but it's something that Queen Elizabeth used to say, which was something along the lines of, to do nothing is the hardest job of all. And it was essentially along the lines of, and I think Queen Mary said this to her. It was Queen Mary's advice to her. She said something like, "To do nothing is the hardest job of all, and this is what you need to do with your life." I think she said, it will take every ounce of energy that you have, and it's to be impartial. To be impartial is not human, but essentially that's what you need to do, right? It was along those lines, right? Do you think that Queen Elizabeth II did nothing?
Yes. I think Queen Elizabeth II, and what she's talking about is in a political context. I think Queen Elizabeth II did nothing. To my mind, I saw Queen Elizabeth II on one, maybe I could do three occasions, do something. One burnt her, which was with Diana. She did nothing and it burnt her, so she had to do something, okay? And that's Tony Blair, who made her do something, because he feared that the monarchy would be lost totally. So she was keeping to that maxim, and it didn't work. Second one was, I think, and I think I'm right in saying this, that she did something in terms of some of the colonial aspects right in the beginning, particularly as it relates to Kenya, because that was a country where the settlers, white settlers, wanted to keep the country as it was. And around about the same, I would argue, for Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. So in effect, did something, but wasn't out and out diplomatic, but a little bit more than would have been the norm. And the third one was with the European Union. I think there was no coincidence in any way, shape or means in the headgear she wore. You know the headgear I'm talking about because the press made it. There was no coincidence about that process. I think she did her homework. She saw it was not positive for our country and wore the headgear she wore, and also disliked the man who came into power as a result of it. And I think that's a given from everybody who's ever been Royal saw that she did not like that individual who became our Prime Minister. So, but other than that, the vast majority of time, I think she was able to do nothing. So the reason why I'm saying it like that is because I don't know whether the man coming in to power, who's been used to doing something at some level, can now totally shut things down. Because you mentioned it with Rwanda. I think he will find that very difficult, personally. My personal feeling, having met the individual once and spoken to him for a period of time once, I think he will find it very difficult to not have some political perspective. And I also think the family have seen that with the youngest son who suffered from that process as well. You know, he hasn't got a job, but he's meant to not be political. I don't think he could do that. And I think the ructions of that have been problematic. You know what I'm talking about. Oh my God! But also, Carlton. Oh my God! Like this, let's do another episode on this. Let's honestly do another episode on this. Like the interesting thing about Charles is that the Queen was a matriarch and she had the whole family, and she had the palaces and all the rest of it, and everybody had that whole thing, and and Charles was sort of to all intents and purposes, if you believe the media and the media sources, a little bit of a pariah within his own family anyway. And so that then you've got his bloodline, and then you've got the Prince Andrew scandal, and then you've got Princess Anne, who's not obviously there's there's all that, and Edward, and then it's it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the landscape of even just the family, that where's the glue that glues it all together? I think the youngest son of Prince Charles. I'll let you wrap this up with that. I will wrap it up because I think I'll leave people with the youngest son, and we all know who we're talking about, right? of Prince Charles, I believe, could not stand to just say nothing. Especially because he'd never inherit the title anyway. So why am I just not going to say anything? Why am I not going to do what I want to do in terms of be somebody?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I remember the press put out a big story when I think it was Prince George's 7th birthday or something, and they put out there was a huge story about, for his birthday present, for his 7th birthday present, his parents sat him down and told him that one day he was going to be king. And you think, what age will they tell his sister and the younger brother that they won't?
Exactly. What a burden.
You know?
But by the way, you can't do anything, but you're not going to be anybody. That's the big problem, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, let's do another. We could do a total other episode on this, because I've got so much. I'd love to talk about Princess Margaret as well, because I think she's so interesting. Well,
listen, Fergus, thank you very, very much. I'm actually not going to edit. I'm not going to edit a word, hardly. I'm not. I'm going to let it run.
Right. Well, let's do another episode. But also, in the meantime, go and watch Back to the Future. I can't believe you've never watched it.
I will do. I've never seen it. But I will watch it. And I'll tell you what I think.
A whole hour, 52 minutes or whatever wasted.
Yeah. Is it going to be wasted? Because I don't want to waste my time with it. But yeah, no, I'll watch it.
Oh my God, I can't believe. No, there are so many cultural references in Back to the Future that you need to know, Carlton, that you need to know.
Okay, I will watch it. But listen.
Nothing to do with intelligence or counterintelligence or anything. Everything to do about hoverboards.
Brilliant. But listen, thank you very, 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 very much. It's been great to have you on the show again, as normal. I say to all my guests, but I sincerely mean it. It's been great. And frankly, as you said, there's much, much more to cover, and we have to do it again. I hope you can use this for your interest as well as for my interest. And to the listeners, and actually on this occasion, if you're watching through YouTube, viewers, hope to see you again next week.
And donate, subscribe, everything, all of those things, 5-star rating, all of those things.
Oh, thank you very much. That's great. I never say it, but you're saying it for me. See, this is the difference with a publicist. Ladies and gentlemen, all the best. Thank you very much.
Oh, take care. Bye.
Yeah.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
In the quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.